Welcome into the Living Room Disciple podcast. Today we are rolling back the clock and looking at God through the eyes of a child. Phil and I are sitting down for a conversation about how we've been formed by our children and how Christians ought to be formed by the faith, joy, and playfulness of children. Now, before we jump in, you can support the work we're doing around here on Patreon by visiting livingroomdisciple.com, and make sure to share these episodes with your friends. Without further ado, let's have a conversation about the way children form us to look more like Jesus on this episode of the Living Room Disciple podcast, where discipleship finds a home.
I can still remember bringing Luke home from the hospital. Me and my wife, we were 23 when Luke was born, and he's our oldest. And I still remember the drive, and it was like the first time in my life, like I think I was driving under the speed limit. I was so nervous, had my kid in the car. And then we were renting a house at the time, and we can still remember, you know, we had him in the car seat. It was one of those car seats that was like removable, you know what I mean? And so we're like carrying this car seat carefully in, and we put the car seat and Luke, you know, on the living room floor, and me and Brittany sit on our couch. And my memory lasts up until this one moment where like we're sitting there for a moment, and then I remember saying, "Now what?" Like, you know,
That is the moment. Yeah.
It is the moment of parenting where if you've entered into that season of life, and for those who have not yet but are desiring, we really do pray that is the season the Lord provides you. But I can remember that just being so young and being so foolish in so many ways, being like a child myself, I was now entering into this lifelong role of father, and I had no idea what that meant. And here I am 9 years later, and I feel like I still don't fully know what that means, but I've learned so much and I've grown so much. Do you remember bringing Griffin home from the hospital?
I do. I also remember driving really slow, and I remember giving him a little house tour when we got home. This is where you're gonna live, buddy. Yep. And yeah, I think actually we've been doing this podcast for almost a year now, and this is probably the conversation we are most qualified to have, because we
Yes.
full on took children into our homes and live with them full time and observe their every move and do almost nothing without thinking about how it affects our children or our family. And this is the thing we spend the most time on and probably give the most thought to in our life. We should have had this conversation sooner, probably, and warmed up for other conversations we were less qualified to have.
It is funny too, because like I don't know, I don't throw the word expert around much at all, but you know, me and my wife, we have 4 boys now, and we've really been doing this for a season, and I think we're pretty good parents. Not to brag, you know what I mean, but you know, but I literally like 2 hours before we were recording this podcast, I had to return some things to Home Depot and get some new stuff. We're in the middle of like a bathroom remodel, and so to give my wife a break, I take our 3 youngest boys. And so I'm like, you know, we've got to return a case of tile and some little things. And so I got my 2 that can walk. They're holding some of the little things. And then I baby carry my like 18-month-old, and I'm holding a case of tile while baby carrying. And we just waddle on in, you know, into Home Depot. And my wife talks about this too. Like sometimes we get looks from people, and it brings me out of like myself, and I realize, oh, like this is weird, I guess. Like baby carrying and like, but you know, my kids are really well behaved, and this is just what I'm trying to say is like, this is my life. Like, this is like, I don't think about this. Like, I don't think to myself, oh, I can't do that because I've got these kids, or this, you know, I just think to myself, I've got to return these things. I've got to take these kids, and they're my best friends anyways. So this is how I live and breathe. You know, I live and breathe as a father of young children, and I don't question it, or it's just who I am. And I think that's actually really important. That's where I really want to get to tonight. So I'll just put the question out there to start us, Nick. The question I really want us to talk about is, how have me and you, specifically just us, but maybe some other people can relate, how have we been formed by being fathers?
Yeah, that is a question with a million answers, I think. And any dad or any mom or any grandparent or any aunt or uncle would probably have a different answer. But I think there's probably shared experiences as well. But I think the first thing that comes to mind for me is just the humbling experience, the way that it takes you out of the center position in your life, where it's no longer, I feel like sitting for 5 more minutes, so I'm going to sit for 5 more minutes. It's like, nope, I need to get up right at this exact moment. That's otherwise there's going to be something disgusting on my wall, or somebody's going to get woken up from their nap, or, whatever it is. But it really does a job on your life like nothing else I've ever experienced, that takes you out of kind of the main character role of your own life. And you really get to enter into, really, you don't have a choice whether you enter into the posture of Jesus washing the disciples' feet. Like you live to be a servant of people who society would say are on a lower level than you. But your existence is to give them a better life, to contribute to their flourishing, to love them with all that you have, even if it means more discomfort or less rest for yourself, and all the other ways that we sacrifice for our kids in love. And so I think it can be easy to just assume that and do it robotically, and even be frustrated by it and resentful about it. But if we allow Jesus to work in it, if we allow the Holy Spirit to fill us to do it, I think that changes everything. We can actually allow it to be a discipling season, where we don't just do it because we have to, but we do it because I'm becoming more like Jesus as I serve the least of these, so to speak.
I really agree with that. And I'll yes and I'll say, because you made that one comment that like becoming a parent is one of those moments that removes you from like being the main character or the protagonist of your own life, And I think that's could be true. I think parenting for me is similar to marriage, but it's like the next step in some ways of selflessness, where you kind of see who you really are to some extent. Like it brings your selfishness to the surface. I used to tell people that when I got married, I lost half my hobbies. And then when I had kids, I lost the rest, which is a little facetious. But the idea, though, it really is that like when you enter into marriage, you have this like partner that you are kind of, at least idealistically, trying to enter into this partnership. And there's going to be some give and take. But when you have a child, you expect no give. It's all take. You know what I mean? And it is in that. I mean, I want to be clear. My children, as they've gotten older, they've given so much to me in ways that they can't understand. But there's still, at least of my time and of my energy, it's just this taking and taking and taking. And that provides me thousands of opportunities, hundreds a day, of forks in the road of who will I become and what will I do with the time I have, Because I do think it's still very easy, to your point, like it's easy to be a parent that leans deeper into their own selfishness, that stays on the couch, that stays with their head in the phone, that just quickly shoves their kid in front of a TV or a screen. And it's when you say like I am tired, and the primary response, like the primary desire I have right now is to feel good, and so I'm going to manipulate the situation whatever I can to make sure I feel good in that. And that is a form of parenting that I think is really prevalent. And so for me, fatherhood has just given me a million opportunities to make a choice about who I'm going to be, and I have not always chosen correctly. But the blessing has been it's given me a lot of opportunity to choose correctly, which means that here I am 9 years into parenting, and I really do think that I'm further along in my walk with Jesus than for me, and this is an exclusive to Phil thing, than I would be without children. Now, I think there's a lot of people. No way. That's so on point for the podcast. If you're not on YouTube, you can't see it. But we have a special guest who's sliding into Nick's camera.
He's been in here for several minutes.
Okay, we're taking a quick break, and I kid you not, one of Nick's kiddos just made, do you call it a podcast bomb? They just like hopped in to our podcast. So while Nick is putting him back to bed, I'll just let you all know to please follow us on YouTube and Instagram and all the social media platforms. We have a new series of videos called Unfiltered coming out, and you don't want to miss them. It's all about my own personal writing journey as I'm working on a book, and some of the background stuff here on the podcast and how we put the podcast together. So make sure to follow us on those things and keep up with that. And if you don't know, we have a website, livingroomdisciple.com, and you can check that out for more info on us and what we're doing and how we're doing it and how you can support us on Patreon. So, all right, and back to the show. You know what the funniest thing is about this interruption, Nick?
What's that?
Because there's this thing that me and my wife experience all the time. I want to know if you and Taylor have it too, where my kids interrupt me all the time.
Yeah.
Like I've had to deeply grow.
That is a shared experience that we have.
Yes. We'll like be trying to have a conversation that's like super serious about the future of our family, whatever it is. And then it's, Dad, I'm all done going potty. And it's like, I guess I'm taking care of that now.
Or just screaming for no apparent reason with no agenda at all. Just noise. Yeah, absolutely.
But there's this part of like being interruptible that I think I've had to grow in as a person because of fatherhood. That's such a characteristic of the Lord. And I think the good news is, and maybe you have this experience too, it's because it's happened in my home, in my safe place, in my sanctuary. You know, like I'm one of those people who loves my home. It's like my castle, you know what I mean? Kind of thing, like I'm safe here. But inside of this place, I've had to develop the ability to be interruptible. And I don't always handle that well. You know, it's tried my patience over the years. But it's brought me to a place where I think it's a huge contributor to being far more interruptible in the world. And when I say interruptible, I mean somebody who can be interrupted and you become present in the new moment, right? You're doing X, Y, Z. You know, someone asks for money or someone needs help or someone's having a clear, obvious problem, and you can pivot from your own internal thoughts and from your own thing into the new moment to serve and value that person.
Right.
And
the cycle
I think parenting's
of that.
done that.
Yeah, the cycle of that is really cool as well, because it's something that your kids kind of form in you. And then as you model it out in the real world outside of your home, your kids get to witness you doing it. And then they learn to be interruptible. And then it's kind of this incredible pattern. When I was growing up, I remember my dad modeling for me very well how to stop. And if you see somebody suffering, you stop for them. And he was an incredible example of that to me. And then when I get opportunities to do things like that, just this morning, there was a woman in front of my house who was parked out in front of the house. And I looked outside and noticed that the car had a flat tire. And my wife was at work. So I took both kids outside with me and said, do you need help changing your tire? I've got these two little ones, but I can do the best I can to help you. And luckily, I don't know how that would have worked. Luckily, she had a friend that was just a couple minutes away that was coming to help, because I don't know how I would have changed a tire with both of them running around outside. But to have that opportunity for the kids to see that and know this is what we do. When we see somebody in trouble, we help them. And in many ways, that's something that was formed in me, not just because my dad modeled it for me when I was a child, but it's because it's something that my children model for me maybe not model for me, but form in me as they constantly need help and assistance with things, and kind of force me into remembering that, again, I'm not the main character of the story.
Yeah, I'm totally in agreement. Like that's another thing that parenting's done for me. It's made me really cognizant of how I'm acting, because you see it mirrored in your kids.
Right. Oh, 100%.
There's I heard, maybe I mentioned it on the podcast before, when I was like 16 or something. I wasn't even following Jesus yet. But my sister would bring me to church services. And so I remember a pastor one time saying that you need to be the person that you want your kids to be. Referring to the fact that we have a lot of parents who are like, I want my kid to be better than me, kind of thing. And he's like, I get it, but like, that's not how that works. Your kids will often become very much like you. And so you need to be the person you want your kids to be. And that stuck with me. And clearly it still sticks with me today, well over, 15 years later. And it's true. Like looking at I wonder too, I don't know, we're only boy dads I don't know if this transcends, if I had girls or something, but especially having boys, I feel like I'm constantly looking at mini me's,
Yeah.
like little mirrors. Like they're not
Yeah.
perfect mirrors. They're their own individuals, but it's so often that they do something and I think to myself, that's what I do. That's what I taught them. That's good
For
and bad,
better or for worse. Yeah.
for better or for worse,
Yeah.
like, and that forms you. And so there's been more than one opportunity where I have no idea how my treasures in heaven are doing. Because there are times where I know I've done the right thing. I'd love to say just because I love the Lord and I'm trying to please him. And that's hopefully often true. But sometimes, I'm telling you, sometimes it was just because I didn't want my kids to see me to do the wrong thing. That
Yeah.
like I felt that pressure in a good way. I think it's a good, healthy pressure to be, like, is this the man that I want Luke to be?
Mm-hmm.
And like you just ask yourself like that question for real. Like, is this really what I want? Like want Luke to do?
Yeah.
And oftentimes that has driven me to doing the thing I think is correct or right or in alignment with the Lord,
Right.
because I'm cognizant of who I'm making him.
Yeah, it turns out do as I say, not as I do is not very effective because, like life skills and the way you live is more caught than taught. I've heard it
Mm-hmm.
said that people will do what they see modeled for them, and they will do what makes sense in their social context much more than they will do something that they just heard somebody say one time. And so in
Mm-hmm.
parenting, that's true, but also just in discipleship, in the way that we live our lives. The thing about kids is that they have no filter that stops them from just copying what you do. Adults generally know a little bit better, but they're still watching. They still see, oh,
Yeah.
well, Phil calls himself a Christian, Nick calls himself a Christian, and I
Mm-hmm.
couldn't help but notice that they did this thing that I didn't think Christians would do, and they probably
Mm-hmm.
most of the time won't just go out and copy that, but they will take it in and they will form the picture of this is what a Christian is. And that doesn't mean that all the weight is on our shoulders, but it does mean that we have a responsibility to be filled with the Spirit, to bear the fruit of the Spirit, so that we're modeling Christ-like love to the best of our ability, by the Spirit's power in us.
Mm. The other cool thing about like how we're formed by being fathers is I learn a lot from my kids. And
Yeah.
as
Every
I'm
day.
reading, oh my gosh, especially as I'm reading scripture, like when I read scripture, oftentimes the truth of that scripture is revealed through the lives of my children.
Yeah.
Um, I was reading a book called Walking on Water by Madeline Leangle. Can't recommend it enough, especially if you're a Christian artist or writer, musician, that kind of thing. Like if you're into the Christian arts, like just it's a fantastic read. And she was talking about how like in the kingdom of heaven, like work and play is almost this inseparable kind of thing, that when heaven and earth are united in the beauty of it, the way work is intended to be is that you can't tell the difference between work and play. And so she was giving a visual example that I was very quickly able to think about with my children about like watching a kid at play. And if you really think about it, especially if they're doing certain things, you're like, are they playing? Or are they working? My children are way into Legos. Like they're all Lego addicts. And actually all of them, but especially my oldest, he will get serious about building a set or building his own creation. And you have these moments where like the amount of diligence and hard work and thought process that he's putting into this, you're like, is he playing or is he working? And for him, they're not different. They're the same thing. They will build forts outside or, create their own games and own stories and own worlds. But with such intensity and determination and diligence that there's like it's, and what I'm trying to get at is that reveals to me an element of what the kingdom of heaven will be like. And because you ask yourself, like, what am I going to do for eternity? I'm going to do something that's similar to the way my kids play with Legos. And what I
Yeah.
mean by that is it is going to be full of joy and play and hard work. And it won't feel like the weight of work that I experience in my 40-hour week job. It will feel like a freeing and joyous thing that I still will work diligent and hard at. And it's so cool
Yeah.
to see that truth in my kids.
Yeah, that, and there's something so beautiful about the way God created the world, so that as we grow up, the way we learn to work or to interact with others is through playing. Like we're
Yes.
hardwired to play from our earliest stages. Um, and so yeah, as your kids go out and they build little worlds and create little social structures, and even as they play
Mm,
school or they play doctor, they come up with these different games where they're kind of seeing what they've seen on TV or read in books, or they've seen adults do, but they're kind of making their own little social worlds where they get to learn this is
mm,
how to be a human being. And it all starts with play. And I think
mm,
there is something about the way that, the beginning of the Bible starts in the garden, and the end of the Bible, we're back in a beautiful garden in God's presence once again. And I think there's something about the beginning reflecting the end, or vice versa, where we have these
mm,
mirror images in the beginning and the end, where we are born hardwired to play. And like you said, in the end, after Jesus returns, there will be this joy-filled work for the kingdom of God that's
mm,
somehow fulfilling in the sense, in the way that joyful playing is fulfilling. I don't know if you've had this experience. I'm curious, but I've also had the experience of watching my kids play, and my kids are young, real young. They're 3 and 1, and when they play, it's just with reckless abandon and laughter, and there's no,
yeah.
like, if something goes wrong, it's totally fine. They're just having a great time, going wild, right?
Yes.
And most of the time when I'm playing with them, I'm doing it kind of as the adult in the room. But there have been
Mhm.
times where I just decide I'm not going to do that right now. I'm just going to fully give into the childlikeness of this moment, and I just like pretend I'm a 3-year-old and just go at it with them.
Yeah.
And there's something about just like entering into their joy and their, Bob
Mm,
Goff would use the word whimsy, their wonder and their whimsy, and just like fully
mhm,
immersing yourself in that really reminds you that this is, amidst all the brokenness and all the horrible things that happen in our world, this is a really beautiful place that God has created. And
mm,
fellowship with one another, community with one another. There should be something childlike about that, where when we're with one another, we just feel that joy and that sense of freedom and laughter and
mm.
celebration. Have you had any experiences like that with your children, where you're able to see joy through a new perspective because of their childlike view?
Yeah, I mean, I've grieved. I remember even just 2 years ago, just grieving the loss of a loved one and struggling, and the the level of healing that laughter in my home, and yeah, like to your point, like being able to play with my. So for us, it tends to be a lot of like they have like wooden swords, like very classic kids. So it's a lot of outside wooden sword type play. I end up, dude, they're at this age, by the way. I'm just gonna whine for a moment. Like my knuckles are always hurt. Like for so long, I just, I could whoop their butts real easy. It wasn't hard, you know what I mean? And I could dodge. And now they're like better than me. And so like I just every time we play, I'm like my hands, and I'm like, what the heck?
You
I
win again.
dude, and I'm like, well, I don't know what I'm gonna do in like 2 or 3 years. I'm gonna be like walking away playing with my kids with broken bones. But anyways,
Yeah.
but yes, and I don't know why this came to mind when you were talking, but what you're talking about in our culture is so often it's a joy and a pleasure that's fully reserved for those who have
Hmm.
young children and have a healthy and stable home. There's a lot of people listening to this who maybe they have kids, but due to divorce, they don't get to see their children as much, or their
Right.
children, have certain struggles and difficulties that create fewer of those moments, and more
Hmm.
more difficult work, and or maybe someone's a single parent, and like so, or just doesn't have children. Like there's a whole stack. And one of the things that I didn't realize until probably like 2 years ago, um, is the need. This is I I don't know how this will sound, but I think it's really important to say that like there's a need for young families to open up their homes so that other people can experience the joy and the healing nature of those
Mm,
childlike interactions.
right.
Um, and we did not do this very well with our first two children in their youngest years, but over the last probably 2 or 3 years, we've just gotten much better at opening up our home, opening up our space that for us is like this sacred treasured, keep it kind of like Gandalf in Lord of the Rings, keep it secret, keep it safe, like this is don't open up my home. And as we've done that more and more and more, one of the themes that's come out is just the number of individuals who feel like the relationships they develop with my children are so healing to
Mm,
them. Maybe
right.
they've never had children, and that season of life is past for them, or perhaps there's difficulties they've experienced, or that hasn't happened yet, or whatever it is, or they don't have anything like that. Kids aren't even on their radar, and it's not something they're wanting right now. But still, interacting with my children tends to be this fun, part of their life. I'm thinking of one individual from our home church, and right now every time she comes over, my kids drag her outside, and she has to blow bubbles for them, and they hit them with their swords. My children are not really violent. I know I'm making it sound like that right now. It's very
They're
silly.
attacking your knuckles and
Yeah, they call it ninja training though. Like
nice.
the bubbles get blown, and then they have to like strike the bubbles.
I like it.
And she just sits out there and she hangs out with them and she talks to them and she plays with them every week right now. I mean, like,
Mhm.
and I think what's so beautiful is like when we allow people to enter into our lives, they also drink from the cup of beauty that we have in our lives, and our children can be a part of that.
For
Uh,
sure.
and I've noticed that it's not normal for the earliest years of my parenting journey, and I'd love to hear from you on this. For the earliest years of my parenting journey, I think I was forming our family to be one of reclusiveness because we had to take
Right.
care of like our own, you know what I mean? Kind of like, we were
Yeah.
figuring out the parenting thing. And to instead begin to take the risk of opening up our home and opening up our lives, I've watched as my children have been better ministers to people than me.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they're the little vessels of joy. That doesn't
Mm-hmm.
mean that they don't come with headaches and difficulties and struggles, of course, but
Oh, not my kids. My kids are perfect.
yeah, right.
I'm
But
just kidding.
I think that's one gift of the church is that it's this community where from 0 to 100 you have everybody together as one big family, one big body of
Mm,
Christ, and a 3-year-old has strengths that a 97-year-old does not have. They also have weaknesses that a 97-year-old does not have, and everywhere in between. So it's almost like the Apostle Paul was telling the truth when he implied that we need each other, that the hand actually needs the foot and and the eye needs the ear, and we actually really do rely on each other, because the 3-year-old can offer something to the
mm,
church community and often doesn't get the chance to the way our churches are set up, but the 3-year-old can offer something to the church community that the elder cannot, or that somebody my age cannot. And I think you're absolutely right that it's a gift, and that when we open the Bible and see Jesus say that somebody should have childlike faith, that we should try to see the
mm-hmm,
world through the eyes of a child.
mm-hmm.
I try to take that. This sounds kind of paradoxical, but I try to take that really seriously.
Yeah.
Just like opening the Bible or looking at the world and saying, what would this look like through eyes that are just a couple feet off the ground, and still have this like huge imagination beyond my comprehension.
Mm-hmm.
Like they can imagine things and dream things and believe things that are totally untrue or totally crazy. And they just think, yeah, that's how it is. That somebody told me that. So yeah, that's true. Um,
Yeah.
and there's something about just the wonder and big vision for what is possible and what could be true, not to mention just this unending sense of trust that if my daddy told me that, then that's how it is, and what if I had that posture with God, with the Father, that if he said it, that's just how it is. Like, I know it sounds kind of crazy
Mm.
to believe that there's a kingdom in the skies that I can't see, but one day is going to come, bring
Yeah.
love and peace and shalom to the whole world. Like, that sounds really crazy, but if my father said it, then it's true, right?
Mm.
So yeah, kids have so much to teach us, and I think we should listen and try to see the world through their perspective.
As we wrap up here, I'll just throw out, because you kind of like set me up in a T-ball for this, like this is a softball, whatever you call it. Sorry, my kids are playing T-ball. So that's actually one of the things too that I feel like being a parent has brought me to a place where I take honesty really, really seriously
Mm,
because of what you just talked about. The fact that like my kids will believe what I say.
right.
And, I want to say this with two things that I want to be both mutually true and powerful. I want to be real. I have a lot of conviction with what I'm about to say, but I also don't have a lot of judgment. So it's not I really believe in what I'm saying, but I don't judge people who disagree with me. But this is why I don't lie to my kids. And I know that's like a bold claim, and somebody's gonna be like, "Oh, Phil," no, like really, I don't lie to my kids. There are absolutely times where I tell my children, I don't feel like I will literally say, I've literally said to Luke, I just don't think you're at a point cognitively where you can understand the conversation that we'd have to answer your question. I promise you we will come back to it when you're older. But this is what I can tell you so far. But I've never told my children that Santa is real, because he's not. I've never told my children that the tooth fairy is real. It's not. Like, we never did any of that. I wanted to make sure that when I told them that there is a God who loves them, that Jesus Christ became a man and died because of their own wrongdoing and my wrongdoing, and loved us so much that he's bringing this new kingdom, and we're a part of it right now, even though it's like, when I say all that, it's really hard. It's big stuff. And like, I want there to be this beautiful, clean, as much as I can. I like this slate where my boys say, like, Dad's never lied to me. Like, I tried and true everything Dad has said. There was never this, I never had to sit my kids down and say, "Oh, remember when I told you XYZ? Well, actually," and I remember having those moments as a kid. I remember, because 9 times out of 10 too, kids figure it out before parents tell them, which creates this deep wound. I don't think people realize, like, even if it's something stupid like Santa, like, it's not stupid like Santa. It's your children know that you have lied to them. They know. And that's a thing that has to be processed through, that if you did it once, you'll do it again. You've created a habit of, and I've had to process through, like, man, when I'm looking at my son, I want to know that to the best of my ability, like, maybe I've been wrong about something, but to the best of my ability, I've been honest. That has been one of the hardest things in parenting, because when I've had to approach parenting in that way, which is really countercultural, there's been a lot of bad stuff that's happened in the world. A lot of difficult conversations have had to come up. Oh my gosh, and through COVID, and just, oh my gosh, so many difficult conversations. My kids are asking questions, and having the humility to say things like, "I don't know how to explain that to you yet. I don't feel like I'm wise enough to even know. I need time to think about that. I love you so much. I'm afraid to tell you." Like, just being honest about my feelings and emotions has created both a beautiful relationship with my children, but a lot of humility and dependence upon the Lord. And anyways, it's something I'm really convicted about. I really don't stand in judgment. I understand why people make the decisions, like telling kids about Santa, and they disagree with me. That's totally fine. I want to be clear about that. But it's something I'm really convicted about, because our children will become the type of people, are likely to take on a lot of the qualities that we demonstrate. And if the Lord is truth, and if there's no lie that is found within him, then, man, we got to pursue that too. Okay. What would be your closer, Nick? What would be like something that your kids have really taught you, or, like, you've really been formed as a dad over these last 3 or 4 years?
First, I want to say, I think what you said about just straight up telling your kid, I don't think you're ready for that conversation yet, but we will absolutely come back to it, rather than making up some silly something that isn't true just to get them to stop asking, whether it's storks deliver babies or whatever. But I think it's very noble to be honest and just say, I don't think you're quite ready for that yet, but we'll come back to it. So I fully applaud that. I do want to play Santa's advocate just real quick.
Oh gosh. All right, here we go. All right.
Because
defend him in the elves.
I do think there's a difference in lying to your kid about something that's just like straight up black and white, that's a lie, versus doing something that stokes their imagination and their sense of wonder for the world. So the example that I would give is, like, in Daniel and in Revelation, there are these stories about dragons and women riding dragons and crazy things that happen. And John, the Revelator, is not literally saying at the end of time there's going to be a dragon. He's painting an imaginary picture that means something, even if he's not telling the literal truth. And so I think you could say that Santa means the generosity and wonder of Christmas. And that's not to say you should tell your kids or shouldn't tell your kids about Santa, but I think I wouldn't paint with as broad of a brush to say to tell your kids that Santa is real is a lie. I think it's an imaginative story that allows them to dream and hope and wonder. And I don't think that means that you need to or don't need to. But I think there is a difference between lying about something that's just straight up like, I'm just not telling you the truth, versus talking about a character, whether it's Santa Claus or Mickey Mouse. There's room for wonder and imagination in that, I think. And I think that's one of the gifts that kids can give us.
I feel like we need to come back to this December of 2024.
Next Christmas.
Because I got more to say. I'm not, but it's not the focus of this conversation.
Yeah, no, I think starting, I mean, right, it's fitting to finish where we began, and in a conversation about the beginning of life as a human being. But I really do think that whether you're a parent or not, if you are a member of a church, there are children in your family, and finding ways to see the world through their eyes and serve them and get curious with them, and don't just push them away when they have something to say, but really listen and wonder, how can God speak through this? Because Jesus seems to take that seriously, and as a child speaks something in faith, taking that seriously, I think allows us to humble ourselves and not take ourselves so seriously, and not think that our reason and our intellect and our decision making and all of the qualities that we think make us special and important as adults, it allows us to take a step back and recognize that humans really are story-driven creatures, driven by our bodies and our wants and our desires. And we're all just big children that have grown up, but still have those same things, right? And so I think humbling ourselves and remembering who we are as human beings through the eyes of children, as we take the opportunity to serve children, not in ways that lower or demean them, but in ways that lift them up and honor them and give them the opportunity to speak into our lives.
To hold your little child and to have this like visceral understanding that to some extent you are this kind of child.
Man,
at the feet of the Lord.
Absolutely. Yeah. How about you? What are your closing thoughts on how you are formed by children?
I just have to agree with you. Like, it is that element of like the longer I'm a father, the more I relate to the father as a child. You know what I mean? Like, it's as I watch my kids and they relate to me, I learn through the way they come to me, through the way they interact with me. I learn, oh, that's how I'm supposed to be with the Father. And it is moved into my prayer language. And oftentimes, like, I just adopt, like, I just understand when Jesus tells us to call the Father, like, I like, that's, I don't know, it's more visceral to me, I was just, even praying really recently and I'm just crying. I just be like, Lord, like, I'm just a kid, like, I've got this big decision to make. I'm just a kid, and I just don't get it.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably the best heart posture to have, at least where I'm at in my season of life. I think it's the best heart posture to have with prayer. And it's been a beautiful way that my children have formed me. Thank you all so much for taking time to join me and Nick on this episode of the Living Room Disciple podcast. If you haven't already, make sure to review us on Spotify, Apple, all the things. Make sure to follow us on all the social medias. Check out livingroomdisciple.com for more information about us and how you can support us on Patreon. Also, tune in next week because we have an interview with a scholar all about how children are important to the corporate life of the church. So don't miss that. All right. Thank you so much to Anissa Leib for all the amazing production work and for keeping us sane, to Eric Church for keeping us on track and getting this episode out to the world, to Daniel Ramirez for the composition of our theme music, and to you for joining us here on this episode and being a part of the Living Room Disciple family, where discipleship finds a home.